Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'll tell you what, being a podcast host is a little bit like being a parent in the fact that you're not supposed to choose favorites, but I will say at the very top of today's episode that this is probably one of my favorite business owners that I'll ever get to interview here on the show because I love her business. I love what she's built. I love her mission. I love how she's taken her past experiences and rolled it into her business. I love how adaptable and flexible she was when COVID hit and when the whole world is changing. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Annaline Dinkelmann. Annaline is the owner and founder of a company called Teach Me Wall Street, which focuses on teaching how Wall Street works, who the players are, and what they do. Now, why can Annaline talk about Wall Street so in deep? Because for 15 years, she has been an educator teaching all ages about the stock market and finance. She spent a decade at Morgan Stanley in banking and compliance, and then she moved to day trading, which was very lonely, and led her to start Wall Street Walks in 2008. Different than her current company name. Why? Because she offered tours, lectures, and conferences that blended history, business, and education. But when the pandemic hit, Annaline took her business online and founded Teach Me Wall Street. Her online programs bring Wall Street's energy to virtual classrooms where they teach investing, trading, financial literacy, and the scandals that have shaped the financial world. Her programs have been featured on CNN International and in the Daily Telegraph, Newsday, USA Today. She is incredible at all the things that she does. I didn't tell her this just yet, but I was an economics and finance major myself in undergrad, and so I have so much appreciation for the institutions that have built the modern day financial markets. So this is going to be a fun one to explore Annaline's business and entrepreneurial journey. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Annaline Dinkelmann. All right, Annaline, I am so very excited to have you here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Heck yes, you heard in the intro to this episode just how excited I am that you're here. So I want to hear the whole story from your perspective, though. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Annaline? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
So originally, I'm from South Africa, and my husband and I moved to New York during the 1990s. And then I went to work on Wall Street. And I learned a tremendous amount when I worked there. But the hours eventually got to me, and I decided to leave and become a day trader. And then I realized how lonely that was. So I decided to do tours about Wall Street and the stock market. And my very first client was a high school student group. And I realized you have to do business with the business that finds you. And that led me to build my business and teach a lot of students and university groups over the years. And in the pandemic, I took all my lectures online because pre-pandemic, I had classroom space on Wall Street. So that's my story.
I love that, Annaline, especially because I feel like so often within the entrepreneurial world, we hear that advice of follow your passions. And it's interesting. You and I have that very much shared in common in that my first business, I loved soccer. So I just started a soccer blog and it took off. I didn't anticipate the growth from there. And I'm sure for you, you have so much passion for Wall Street and all things finance and in that entire world. You, of course, live in one of the most significant cities on planet Earth in New York City. And you're at the epicenter of all these big things. Talk to me about that passion or what was that drive after working in Wall Street, after being a day trader that made you say, you know what, I'm going to start offering tours?
You know, I was just really lonely. As a day trader, I had a virtual group that we met every day. But in those days, Zoom wasn't as in use as it is today. So I would never see people. And I also learned I love currency. So I got up early and then 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. I'm done. And I have the whole day ahead of me. What do I do? So that led me to just think, what can I do that won't interfere with my trading schedule? And tours have flexibility. And I thought, I love Wall Street. I'm going to teach people about that. Yeah, so when people come to New York, you come on a food tour or anything, I took my clients to the Federal Reserve, the stock market, the investment bank, like the financial district, just explaining what everyone does.
I love that. Annalyn, take us back to that, because obviously it's been so pivotal and it's the foundation of what has transformed into your online business. What did your first tour look like? You talk about the high school student who found you. I don't know if I should picture, Annalyn, you just standing on Wall Street with a flag saying, I offer tours. What did that first tour look like?
First of all, I got my first client. My website in those days, you could put up a sign that say, website under construction. So based on that, I got the student group. And it was the first time I heard the word FBLA, the Future Business Leaders of America. They actually, I learned, study some Wall Street programs in business, and they came on a field trip. And after that, I went to school in a different country. So this was like a new learning experience for me. But I loved it. And after that, many more school groups found me. And the financial crisis eventually put my business really on the map.
Yeah, I love that, especially because that was such a pivotal moment in time. I was in college, like I said, majoring in economics and finance during 2008. And so we're all very much aware of that time. And I would imagine it drew increased interest in all things Wall Street. With that in mind, obviously you did something with that interest. You started those tours. You also had lectures. You also had conferences that talked about the history, the business, the education side of it. How did all of that evolve? Because I always talk about the importance of understanding offers in businesses. It seems to me from the outside looking in, I'm excited to hear your perspective on it. How did that evolve over time as far as what did you offer and what were the things that you were providing in the marketplace?
So when I started in 2008, I had two main tours. One tour just focusing on Wall Street and finance, focusing on the history. And I had one tour specifically about the stock market crashes. Because stock market crashes is really what shaped Wall Street. The crash of 1929 created the SEC, the FDIC, and a lot of the regulators of Wall Street. So, and then it has evolved over time. So I had this Wall Street tour, and one of my stops on that tour was the bankruptcy court, where many famous companies, including Lehman Brothers, filed for their bankruptcy. And Time Out magazine, every year, in those days, twice a year, they reviewed walking tours in New York, and they chose my Panics and Crashes tour. And after that, I had a lot of journalists on my tour, and it just it organically grew.
Yeah, I love that organic growth. And I know that it's something that has followed throughout your career, and rightly so, because you work on something that's so cool and it's so impactful. I wish as a teenager that I got to see your passion for Wall Street, Analin, because there are so many questions. It's something, growing up in Boston, I know where the Federal Reserve building is in Boston. I've seen it in New York City, but we don't know what goes on inside of those buildings. But it allows us to dream, to picture career paths, to picture networking opportunities, and really deepen our knowledge and passion for the financial markets. So with all of that in mind, it doesn't surprise me about that organic growth. Talk to me about the trajectory of it, though, because what was your mindset like in 2008 when you first started? And then when all of a sudden you started being featured as one of the best tours in New York City, and you started to see that growth, where along the journey did you say, I'm onto something, and this is what I want to invest in and double down in and continue this as a service?
Brian, this may sound strange, but in the beginning, I was completely green. I worked on Wall Street, and nothing can really prepare you for what comes on your entrepreneurial path. So I remember in January, I had a group of financial journalists, January 2009, on my tour. And this one journalist kept talking to me while I was giving the tour, and I wish he would just shush. And then 3 days later, I was featured in his newspaper with my tours. And I noticed that when I got a lot of traffic from that country. This journalist was actually from Turkey. And after that, more journalists found me, and it was just organic. I never set out and said, this is my mission. It has just evolved. And for me, pivotal moments was those moments when you want to pull your hair out and say to the client, I don't want to do this. I don't know what to do. But that has really catapulted me forward over the years. And looking back, I realized that was organic growth. Those moments of frustration are your greatest moments to embrace. And when things come on right after that is not so fun, I will often get excited and say, what is in store for me now? What am I missing? What am I not seeing? Because I've learned those hard moments are your best moments.
Yes, I love those insights and those reflections from you, Annalyn. I'm so appreciative of you sharing that with our worldwide audience, because that's the entrepreneurial journey right there. I remind myself in those low moments of most other people would quit here or most other people wouldn't continue. That's where I persist, and it's something that has always driven me. So it's really cool to hear your reflections in that regard. I want to ask you about scalability, just because knowing that you've worked within the world of finance and in all entrepreneurial circles, people love to talk about scalable businesses, and what I did up front and what you did up front, maybe not the most scalable solutions. However, it was driven by passion. It was a huge proof of concept for both of us in our beginning businesses. What was your attitude towards scale at that time, knowing that your finite resource of time is something that business relied on?
I hired several tour guides to help me, and I worked in the early days with the Actors Work program, and many actors were actually Wall Street professionals that left and pursued their passion. So one of the people on my team was actually a broker, and he worked on the floor of the stock exchange. Another one of my team worked with investor relations. So they were my first hires, and together I was able to scale my business, and over time I've hired several more guides. And then many groups that travel come to New York as an entire school bus or 2 school buses, meaning it's 100-person group. So we just got used to dealing with this. Starting, I had a system of each tour guide would start in a different place on Wall Street. So we would cover all the stops, but just in a different sequence. So we could handle large groups of several hundred people all touring at the same time.
Yeah, I really love those strategic insights. Annalyn, it makes me want to ask you about strategic partnerships. Obviously, you're so well aware of all these different student groups and organizations and associations. Was that part of your growth journey from there that led to that organic growth? Were you in direct contact and partnership with those types of groups and associations?
Yes, I eventually became a sponsor of the FBLA, and I went to many of their conferences, and I also worked a lot with Virtual Enterprises, another student organization. And every year they would have a competition of students where they bring their products together and they run a store, and I was a judge in that competition. It was one of the highlights of my year to go there. And then New York City also have a program where you can get student interns for the summer, and they actually pay the interns. So it's a win-win for businesses. And several years, I got interns from that program, and it is so fun for me to watch the careers of all those interns that I've had over the years. And yes, we still stay in touch. I have coffee sometimes with some of them because they are now all working on Wall Street, and one is a doctor.
That is so cool, Annalyn. That to me shows, it's why I've been so excited about your business and our conversation today, because of those downstream effects. Sure, even if we're talking about a walking tour, for example, that could follow someone through all of their life as inspiration, as an eye-opening moment. So huge kudos to you in the work that you've been doing and the work that you are doing. I want to transition to 2020 because obviously the pandemic comes around and you're doing all of these in-person things. What did 2020 look like for you? What went through your mind when you said, how can we transition this stuff to online?
So when I first started my business, someone gave me a book about questions, and I will never forget the 3 most important questions I always ask myself. When disaster strike? What is good about this? And it's amazing how your brain can think of solutions. In 2020, I couldn't think of a solution, but one of my clients asked me to do an online presentation instead of the walking tour. And I told the client, I've never done this. I may screw it up. And she said to me, we know you will make something good of it. And I remember how energized I was. And the following day, I registered the new domain, Teach Me Wall Street, and I started to promote my summer program. And I never looked back. I learned a tremendous amount. It's like drinking from the fire hose the first 2 years in learning all the online business. But looking back, my team stuck with me, some of them, and we just made success with what we've got. It is the fun years of the business.
Yes, I love that, Annalyn, especially because you've taken us on this journey with you here in this conversation today. So transition, what was the difference? Wall Street Walks all of a sudden becoming Teach Me Wall Street. What stayed the same? What changed? How did it evolve? I want to hear that story.
So I took my tour content and I turned it into Wall Street 101 because you really need to understand who the players are and what they do. And some of that I had already presented as part of my lectures on Wall Street. So I already had some slides. And then it just evolved. When I first started, I taught a class all about fintech because a lot of my background is in financial technology, and that eventually evolved. And in my second year online, I added the budget program. Many parents loved what their students learned, and they asked me, what else do I have to teach? And thus the budget program evolved, and I also added the crypto program later.
Yeah, Annalyn, it's that constant evolution. That's what is so clear to me about your entire journey. Talk to us about that. I mean, you showcase that even with your offers of adding crypto. These are things that you're not just staying the way that you used to offer things in 2008. You're evolving with the market as well as with your own entrepreneurial skills and explorations and in the digital era. So, Annalyn, with that in mind, what do your offers look like these days? I love your website because I can see all the different types of people that you serve, from high school programs, as young as middle school programs, adults. Talk to us about that service offering that's evolved to where it is today.
So I started my main student groups for high school and middle school students. But to teach, I thought I'm going to start with the high school students. And then many of my students, especially in 2020 and 2021, were 12 and 13-year-olds. But I tried in 2022 with a middle school program, and I learned middle school students need a full-time in-person event or a class. So I failed on that, but I kept getting emails from parents. And last year I started and I ran an after-school middle school program, 1 hour a week over 5 weeks. And I continued to do that. And this year I also added the personal finance for middle school students. So the two programs are running back to back now over the winter. And then for high school students, I have my 3 staple programs: Wall Street 101, Investing, and Budgeting. And those I'm running over the winter on Saturdays. And then in the summer, it will run as 1 week virtual program. And the crypto program is a one standalone that I run as a after school program, 1 hour a week over 6 weeks. Or I have a couple of master classes, 3 days, 6 hours in total for the class. So those are my offerings.
Yeah, I love that, Annalyn. It feels silly for me to ask you this, but I am curious your answer on it because it's clear to me that you love the stuff that you do. So I want to reflect back. Being a day trader, obviously you felt that loneliness of just working from your house and being behind a computer screen. Well, here you are now with an incredible online business. Are those interactions with your students that you're working with, is that enough for you, or how are you keeping it fresh so even though you have an online business now, you don't feel that same loneliness again?
Now I try. I have a virtual team, so I have a lot of my meetings on Zoom, and I'm much more alert of like getting out, going places that I don't have that same loneliness. So from time to time, I watch myself that I feel lonely, but I now have much better systems in place than what I had in 2006 and 2007.
Yeah, I love that, especially because systems, it's a core part of every single entrepreneur's journey. I want to ask you about that because your career has so many really interesting twists and turns, obviously working on Wall Street to day trading to being an entrepreneur. What are some of those systems that have served you along the way? Because I would imagine that your professional career, even before your entrepreneurial journey, shaped the way that you think, the way that you view yourself. You clearly have a high level of self-awareness and the way that you operate. How did those things play into the way that you operate as an entrepreneur?
The longer I've been an entrepreneur, the more I understood the value, because I realized like there are certain things that I'm really good at, but certain things I don't like. So when I hire people, I actually have them do several like personality tests that I can identify that I hire complementary to my own skills. And I also work a lot more like I learned on Wall Street. Proper systems in place, project management to track it and like proper procedures and certain of my processes. I can hire any person because it's well documented. I have like a standard operating procedure, things that I had in my corporate career. And I said to myself, I'm so glad to get away from all that admin. And then I turned around and I did exactly the same in my business. Because if you don't have systems, your business can't run.
Yeah, Annalyn, now you're giving us some insights into that executive mind of yours as well. You talk about personality differences and hiring for things that complement your own personality. Give us some of those insights. I found in my 16-year entrepreneurial journey that this is one of the hardest things to get right in business is hiring the right team. I'd love to hear the way you navigate that.
So one of the things that I have learned a lot, in 2012, I learned about the Kolbe test, and that sort of categorize people in like 4 broad categories of skills. So I'm a quick start and I'm a fire starter. I can start a project, but it's sometimes hard for me to finish a project. But people that are like good in their follow through, they cannot start a project because they keep asking questions. And sometimes I have people in that team. I want to say, stop asking questions. You are driving me crazy. But those are the questions that you need. So our skills are complementary. They will say to me, stop, not anymore on the project. And I want to tell them, stop asking me questions. But in that way, it's a healthy relationship and we get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
My husband is the opposite. He's like an inventor. So he helps me with a lot of like technical stuff. I'm not good at all of that.
Yeah, I love that, Annalyn. Honestly, we've all heard about the very simple concept of yin and yang, and it's so important to have that balance, whether it's in marital relationships or business relationships. It's really important. And again, it starts with that level of self-awareness. I want to ask you about when it comes to the future and when you look at where you want your company to go, everyone wants to talk about AI. Everyone wants to talk about information is at our fingertips in a million different ways. Annalyn, it seems like you're so clear on what it is that you are and what it is that you want to be. Talk to me about how you view the future of your company.
You know, growing my company and scaling it. And I actually have a lot of like games and learning tools that I use in my classes. And I want to turn that into something that I can reach more students. So that has been sort of something that I'm working on, and it's one of my projects for this year.
Yeah, and speaking of reaching more students, it's so clear to us when we hear about Wall Street Walks, how much those partnerships, those associations were clear to you. Do partnerships, is that still one of your biggest sources of business, of finding new people and reaching more students? Or what does that marketing mix look like today since you're in the digital world now?
I have found new partners. So I work a lot with college counselors now, working to help students find the right extracurriculars and help them shape their careers. Because a lot of students, when they take my programs, they tell me at the end of the program, we are going to pursue a business career. And it's so fun when I talk to parents and they will tell me, my child, son or daughter is studying Wall Street or like a business career because of your class. So, but there are also a lot of learning tools, and I can see from the feedback from my students, I could make this easier for them, that they could review some of the lessons or work with some of their friends in ways that is accessible to many more people who don't have the time or the money to come on one of my programs.
Yeah, Annalyn, it is so cool. Again, I just want to stress it because it really is life-changing work. I know that myself, having been an avid and very eager student, but also I was a tour guide at school, and nothing made me happier than the next year seeing an incoming freshman say, "You are my tour guide. You are part of why I chose this school." And again, these are decisions that follow these students through for their entire lives. So, Annalyn, I can't stress it enough how much I admire the work that you're doing. I do want to pick on that executive mind a little bit more because you so clearly called out there are things that you don't like doing in your business, and you've got a lot of responsibilities for your business now. You've got your website, you are creating and launching online courses, you're servicing students in person and online. With all of that said, what are some of those things you don't like, and then what is Annalyn doing on a daily or weekly basis as the CEO of your business that you do enjoy?
So admin stuff and routine work drive me crazy. So I try to get rid of that as much as I can. In my previous business as well as now, I'm the teacher, and I find people to do all the admin work around me. And I manage my time really carefully. Every year I do a time assessment, and then I look, where did I spend 80% of my time and which 20% of my time really drove the business forward and helped me pay the bills. And I try to focus just on that, and every year taking more and more stuff off my plate. I once read a book from Elon Musk, and he said, when we developed the rocket, we saw in many things we did, what parts can we take out? So in my own business, I will often stop doing something, and if no one notices within a month, I take it off.
I love that, Annalyn. Honestly, the fact that I thought about it recently with a SpaceX launch, where when you look at Elon's current day rockets, they look so plain. They look nothing like what NASA was launching 20 years ago. And that's such a key point that you made of what can we take away? It's not always about adding things. And with that in mind, I do want to ask you about the actual information or the content. When it comes to that, I mean, any of us could hop on any AI tool these days and come up with all the content in the world. Talk to me about how you structure and create these courses that you're sharing with students all across the country. Is how do you sit down and say, this is what they're going to find interesting, this is what's going to be valuable to them, this is what's going to help them push forward in their passion for Wall Street and finance? How are you structuring the actual information you put together?
So I don't use AI to put that information together. My own experience and knowledge about Wall Street allowed me to make decisions about what needs to be included. And my job as a teacher is to make that information interesting. Because if you have to take the approach of like, what will AI tell me, or what do I think these people would like, you will fail in your job as an educator. My job is to teach them what they need to know, the skills that will help them in the future. And I need to make it interesting for them and memorable, that they will remember these lessons, because many of these lessons I wish I had when I was a child.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Talk to us with that educator hat on. We've heard about Analin, the financier. We've heard about Analin, the entrepreneur. I want that educator hat on. What are some of those, I don't know if they're tricks, if they're tools, if they're tips or strategies? How do you make the content engaging and interesting?
A tour guide has a tough job, because in New York City, you're competing with New York, with fire trucks and all kinds of distractions. So I figured out how to speak in a way to keep those student groups engaged. And when I started in the pandemic in 2020 teaching online classes, that stuck with me. So in my very first class, I didn't have all the slides and everything together, but I could talk over the shortcomings in my program. And the students just loved it. At the end of my first week, my feedback was really good, and I could see one or two students said, change the boring part. I had 2 comments like that, and I felt I failed those students that everything wasn't interesting. And that set me on a course of almost 2 years, learning new skills and making my programs hands-on, interactive, and speaking to the different learning styles of students. Some students are visual learners, other students learn much more by listening, and other students are sort of just visual learners. So I keep an eye on my students. They need to keep their cameras on, no camera, no class, that I can see what their reactions are, where I need to adjust and adapt. And for me, it's one of the challenges to see, can I keep all those students engaged?
Yeah, I can imagine it's very challenging with today's youth because, Annalyn, they are growing up with things that we did not grow up with. We didn't have cell phones, let alone social media and all these cool apps that all of these students are playing with. I want to ask you about training, though, because clearly you found your voice, you found your style as a tour guide. What did it look like when it came to you training? You mentioned those actors that had previous careers in Wall Street. How did you develop that training program to maintain that high standard of excellence that you had achieved?
I wrote down my tour script. I recorded myself a couple of times when I was giving the tour. I made a map and I told them these were the stops. And when I hired each tour guide, I went with them a couple of times, providing feedback. And I would often sort of just blend in the background, keeping an eye out and making sure that everything is running smoothly. And TripAdvisor reviews also kept my tour guides on their toes, because a bad review, I never sort of got rid of my team. But when we got a bad review, they felt personally much worse than me. Because I realized sometimes people just have an experience or they're running late and their tour experience wasn't what they expected. But luckily, that was minimal. Out of like 2,000 reviews, maybe 10 or so in that.
That's incredible. Yeah, Analin, I've got to ask you that then, because that's a skill in and of itself, is that ability to get reviews. And obviously it starts, I want to stress this for listeners, it starts with providing an exceptional experience. But Analin, I am someone who's guilty of, I have a lot of great experiences with a lot of local coffee shops or restaurants. I don't leave reviews all the time or very rarely ever, Analin. So what was one of those secrets for you to get so much incredible feedback and positive reviews publicly that led to that organic growth?
Just ask people. And I leave reviews. I can't expect to get reviews in my business if I don't give reviews. So I'm one of those people, when I go to a restaurant or something and they ask for a review, I write the review. And I ask and encourage my students. And from that, not every person gives me a review. It's a small percentage of people, but those ones are the ones that really care.
Yes, Analin, it really is that simple. I'm so glad that you gave that advice here on the air of just ask. And I'll tell you what, every year I say to myself, I want to become the person that starts leaving reviews, because it only elevates the businesses that we know and love and that we've enjoyed as customers and shares that with others. So this is my commitment. Analin, you were the catalyst that started me to give other businesses reviews. So thank you for that and those insights. And Analin, you've been such a wealth of knowledge that I have no idea how you're going to answer this final question that I ask at the end of every episode, and that is, what's your one best piece of advice? You are a fellow entrepreneur. You're one of us. You've been at this for quite some time, providing an incredible experience for your customers. Your commitment to that shines through in all of this conversation here today. So knowing that we're being listened to by so many entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs around the world, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with?
Take care of yourself. As an entrepreneur, you have many people depending on you for your paycheck, to show up to provide services and everything. But if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your clients and your family and your responsibilities. So over the years, I've taken more time to take care of myself. And that is my advice for every entrepreneur. Take care of yourself.
Yes, important advice for every single one of us, also at every single stage of our journey. So Analin, I appreciate those insights. I'm even more excited than I was before we hit record today about the business, about your business and the work that you're doing. So for listeners who want to explore all that great stuff, drop those links on us. Where can they find your business online?
Easy to find. www.teachmewallstreet.com. That is my main page and easy to remember.
Yes, honestly, huge kudos to you. I'm so amazed at the fact that you have that domain name. Kudos to you. Teachmewallstreet.com. Listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find that link down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Super easy. You can either click through from the show notes or just go to teachmewallstreet.com. That's street all spelled out. Teachmewallstreet.com. Click right on through. Otherwise, Analin, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.